everyone, welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 5 Countdown video. Today our analyst will be listing the top 5 compositions for patch 11.1. This will be the last top 5 video for our first half of set 4, as 4.5 is set to release in the next patch. This means we'll be saying farewell to several of the compositions that form the current meta. But for now, with the last bit of time left for players to climb on ranked, let's go ahead and talk about the top 5 compositions. Before we get back to the video, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Kicking off our top 5, we have Elderwood coming in as the number 5 composition. The number 5 spot is always the least set in stone placement, as the meta has enough composition diversity that several builds could come in at number 5. The deciding factor for Elderwoods is that even though they did receive nerfs in 11.1, they're still one of the most consistent compositions. Compared to, say, Duelist, Elderwood doesn't require as many specific conditions to be met in order for them to do well, while Duelist needs a chosen Yasuo, Yasuo 3, and later on Yone. With all that said, the nerfs definitely did hit Elderwoods rather hard, as they're no longer free wins in the mid game. Instead, you'll need to have a solid early game and need to begin stacking an early Vanguard for them to do well. This isn't necessarily hard to do, but you will find yourself losing quite a bit more health in the mid game if your early game went poorly when trying to play Elderwoods. As for the composition itself, there's 2 main ways to go about playing them, either with Vanguard as the main carry or with Ashe. Ashe with Elderwood isn't really that popular since she's mainly played in Hunter builds, but you can still get away with playing an Elderwood Brawler frontline to protect her. Vanguard is the more common choice when running 6 or more Elderwoods and focusing more on mages than brawlers. Focusing back on the early game, the main nerf to Elderwoods this patch was to Lulu. Lulu was clearly overtuned during the early stages of the game, as finding a Lulu 2 was often a free ticket to level 8. Now with her mana being much higher, you'll find she isn't performing quite as well as before, so 2-starring her and having a strong front line is essential for saving health during the early game. The other hurdle for Elderwoods is needing to find Vanguard relatively early on in the game, usually no later than stage 3, and having at least 1 mana item and a spell vamp item for him. If you can secure those, then great. Elderwoods will do well and will likely get you a top 4. Otherwise, you may find they struggle in the mid game and may want to consider transitioning out of them late game if you have the economy to do so. Let's move on to the next composition, which comes in at number 4, Zed. This is a tough decision on whether or not Zed should go in the 4th or 5th place on the list, because we did just talk about consistency being a deciding factor for Elderwoods and their placement on the list. The issue with Zed does tend to be a lack of consistency, because you need a chosen Zed, Zed 3, and need to secure both Shen and Kayn later on in the game. So why is Zed placed higher on the list than Elderwoods? Well, mainly due to the potential of the comp. Zed as a carry when you have all of your ducks in a row is a monster and can easily earn you a top 2 finish. The highs and lows of a Zed composition are far greater than Elderwoods, so if you're the type of player that likes to go 1st or 8th, then Zed is the composition for you. If you do want to play Zed, there's a few things that you'll need. First, and hardest to find consistently, is a chosen Zed. While you can play without a chosen Zed, it's nowhere near as effective, so only play this build in the games that you're able to find a chosen Zed, preferably during stage 2 or early on in stage 3. The other important thing for this composition is you still want all 4 ninjas. Kennen and Akali should be easy enough to get, while Shen is going to be a bit more difficult. One of the problems with finding Shen, besides the fact that he's contested, is that you'll generally need to be rolling at level 6 to hit a Zed 3. While the chances of finding a 4 cost aren't the worst at level 6, it does mean you may find games where you just can't find Shen early enough in the game. Lastly, you will need to roll for Zed 3 and have good items for him. Items can vary, though RFC helps immensely. Runin's is also recommended, which does mean that this build requires a lot of bows. On the plus side, bow isn't that contested of a component right now, so as long as you're able to secure one from the beginning carousel, you should be able to find 2 more after that. With all of the pieces put together with a chosen Zed 3, 4 Ninja, and at least 3 Shade, you should be in a good spot to place well with the comp. But again, if you're unable to find a chosen Zed early enough in the game, we recommend not forcing this build. Up next, we have Dusk Jhin as the composition coming in at number 3. Overall, Dusk is still one of the most flexible synergies in the game, and that helps a lot for any players that choose to play more flexibly during a game. Because of that, Dusk and Jhin is easily one of the best compositions you can run, because you can fall right into it when rolling at level 7 and 8 without trying to force it. The flexibility of this composition comes in 2 ways. The first is that Dusk can be used as a splash trait with just 2 champions. The second reason is Jhin. Jhin is such a strong backline damage dealer that can be thrown into practically any composition and still do well. And with Dusk Jhin, all you need is a Vayne and you have yourself 2 Dusk and 2 Sharpshooter with just 3 champions. Of course, the flexibility of Jhin as a carry does mean he's likely to be contested by several players. The fact that Jhin is contested by so many players ends up being the main downside of this comp. But as long as you're able to find at least a Jhin 1, you should be able to piece together a functional composition that will scale well into the late game. For the build itself, your standard Dusk Jhin board is going to use the core champions of Jhin, Vayne, Riven, Thresh, and Cassiopeia. From there, you can either lean into Dusk with Lilia and preferably a Dusk Spatula item on Jhin, or you can simply add in defensive traits like Adept, Mystic, and Vanguard. To do that, you can also look for units like Shen, Yone, Zilean, or Aatrox. Another aspect of this build is that you don't need specific items for it. While Jhin does lean more towards sword items, he's able to use quite a few, so you should be able to find at least one every game. Those items are Deathblade, Giant Slayer, and Infinity Edge. But you can also get by with items like Hand of Justice, Runins, and Guardian Angel on Jhin. Plus, utility items like Zeke's, Chalice, and Locket are fantastic for this comp. Overall, if you're going into a game without any particular plan, you can easily find yourself playing some variation of Dusk Jhin and be able to play well consistently. Moving along, we have the number 2 build on today's list, Hunter. We know that Hunter is fairly open to interpretation as to what the composition exactly refers to, but this was intentionally done as we wanted to incorporate the various builds that utilize Hunter in the current meta. The reason for that is that while each build has a different early and mid game, they generally end up in the same place in the late game. The 2 main builds we're talking about are Moonlight Hunter and Ashe. Ashe as the primary carry is far easier to play consistently since, well, you just need Ashe. Moonlight, on the other hand, does require an early chosen Moonlight and ideally a 3-star Aphelios. While it is certainly playable without 3-starring your Moonlight champions, it's not quite as effective since the goal is to have an Aphelios 4. But as we said, the end goal of these build paths is the same, as you want to have around 4 Hunter with a strong frontline. The most common frontline is going to be Adept with Shen, Yone, and Aurelia, but you can be flexible with it. For example, Aatrox was just buffed, so you can always lean towards a Vanguard frontline with him and Sejuani. However you wish to go about it, there's a few key things to keep in mind. First is the champions. For Ashe, ideally you want a Hunter chosen, either her, Kindred, or Warwick. Aphelios can also work, but for the Ashe variation, you really don't want items going on him. For Moonlight chosen, you'll likely need to add in all of the Hunters to get 4 Hunter, or you can scale it back to just 3 instead. Besides the champions, items are also quite important. Ashe is fairly flexible, but you usually need a Giant Slayer on her or even a Deathblade to help against high health targets. Aphelios has stricter requirements since he desperately needs a Rageblade to scale during fights and Quicksilver to prevent being crowd control early on in the fight. In general, the fact that you can play multiple variations of Hunter makes it one of the stronger compositions in the meta. If you get an early Moonlight chosen and your stage 2 goes well, then you can usually transition into Aphelios carry. Otherwise, look to use Kindred as your stage 3 carry and look for Ashe to carry later on. And now for the number 1 composition of our 11.1 patch meta, Legendaries. Yes, we know, just like we said in the last top 5, Legendaries isn't exactly a composition. But the fact is, the late game meta is still all about 5-cost champions and transitioning your board around them. While having a solid mid-game build is important, you can always ignore having a cohesive board, as replacing units with 5-cost champions is a completely valid strategy. Of course, to do this, you will want to hit level 9 or high roll a lot on level 8. So you will need a solid early and mid-game so that your health and economy are strong enough to make the transition. But if you can do that, all you need to do is 2-star some 5-cost champions and toss them right in. In particular, some of the stronger choices are Yone, Kayn, Zilean, and Azir. Zed has also been buffed several times with a whole bunch of bugs being fixed, so he's a worthwhile consideration as well. Overall, one of the best ways to play the meta is to play what the game gives you, transition towards the late game, and play whatever 2-star 5-cost champions you end up hitting. Alright, that's going to be it for our top 5 compositions. But before we go, you already know we have a few honorable mentions to cover. First up, we have Duelist, which we talked about earlier. As mentioned there, Duelists do mainly suffer from requiring specific conditions like a chosen Yasuo, 3-starring him, and hitting Yone late game. Because of that, the composition can suffer a lot in the mid to late game and struggle to place above 3rd. But Yasuo is one of the best chosens for stage 2, so you can always use him to win streak and decide after Krugs whether the composition is worth pursuing or not. Vanguard Mystic has returned to the meta and makes it into our honorable mentions list. After several buffs to Aatrox and a few to Ahri, this composition is once again relatively viable. The main downside to it is that Legendaries will outscale it, and Ahri is not always the most reliable of carries. That said, if you can 2-star your frontline, get a few ability power items on Ahri, the chances of placing in the top 4 with this comp are actually quite high. Another honorable mention that suffers from consistency problems is Warlord. Warlords has an amazing mid game if you can hit 6 Warlords early enough with Katarina 2 and Jarvan 2. The problem is, once you're going into stage 5 and beyond, the composition tends to be outscaled. Plus, your early game does require a bit of high rolling as you need upgraded champions to ensure that you win rounds for the Warlord buff to scale up. Because they don't scale well into the late game, we mainly recommend using Warlords during stage 3 and 4 before transitioning into a different comp at level 8. And the last honorable mention we have is Divine. Divine's issues mainly stem from Warwick being contested by Hunter players. Since he's necessary for the trait to do well, if you're unable to 2-star him or even find him at all, it will be difficult to make Divine function well. That said, if you're able to hit a Warwick 2 and move towards the late game to add in champions like Yone, then this composition can still do quite well. That's all for today's video, folks. It's great that this last patch before set 4.5 has so much build diversity. Really, you can practically play anything as long as you have a strong early and mid game. But with 4.5 on the horizon, there's going to be a lot of changes coming, so if you're enjoying any of the current builds, we recommend playing them before they're gone forever. Let us know in the comment section below which composition has been your favorite throughout the first half of set 4. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.